You ever seen three HOA board members roll up on a man like a SWAT team, just because he's holding a fishing rod? I have. And I was that man. 1 minute, I was sitting on my dock with a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee, the kind that tastes better the farther you are from a paved road. The lake was glass, a mirror to the sky. Morning birds called across the water like they were still rehearsing for spring. Then came the crunch of golf cart tires. 3 of them. A triad of khaki-clad, clipboard-wielding self-appointed lake police, descending with the urgency of a federal raid. At first, I didn't even turn around. I thought maybe it was some kids playing. But then I heard her voice, sharp, nasally, righteous in a way only someone on a suburban power trip can be. "Sir, you are in violation of HOA Code 7B.5. I looked over my shoulder, and there she was, Karen. Wraparound sunglasses, lemon blonde helmet hair, white tennis visor perched like a crown of pettiness. Her laminated clipboard was already open, like she was presenting evidence to a grand jury. "Unauthorized recreational angling," she snapped. "Do you have a valid HOA fishing tag?" I had to bite my cheek to stop from laughing. I mean, what do you even say to that? I was sitting on my own dock, the one I'd personally sanded and sealed after buying this cabin 10 years ago. It wasn't like I was poaching salmon out of a protected reserve. But before I could even process the absurdity, she slapped a yellow citation against my chest like she was tagging me in a wildlife documentary. $600 fine. Further violations will result in legal action. That's when it stopped being funny. Not because of the money. I could afford the fine. It was what the paper represented, an attempt to rewrite the reality I'd lived in for a decade. I looked at Karen and her backup dancers, Rick, a guy whose sandals with socks combo screamed HOA treasurer energy, and Janet, who once filed a noise complaint against a wind chime. They looked smug. They looked like they thought this lake belonged to them now. That's when something deep inside me clicked. Not rage, not even defiance, just curiosity. Dangerous curiosity. Because I suddenly wondered, who really owns this lake? They acted like they did. Their rules, their signs, their citations. But had anyone ever actually checked? Or were they just going off assumptions and inertia, like most bureaucratic machines do? That question settled in my gut like a stone. That night, I walked back home with the yellow slip still crumpled in my fist. On my front door was another notice, orange this time, like Halloween-colored tyranny. Community privilege suspension pending, it warned. Multiple violations. I stared at it for a while, then pulled it down and fed it to the trash can. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just methodically. The wheels were turning now. The next morning, I took a slow walk around the lake. Not fishing. Just observing. That's when I saw them. Brand new metal signs planted along the shoreline. Fishing prohibited. Violators will be fined. One was bolted right next to my dock. Another near the tree line where I stored my canoe. They'd wasted no time turning their little tantrum into policy. That was their game. Quick action, loud proclamations, make people believe their authority was rooted in something real. That's what scared me the most, how easy it was for people to accept someone else's rules just because they were printed in bold. I went back inside and made a phone call I hadn't made in years. "Barry," I said when he answered. "I need you to look something up for me." Barry was my old college roommate, now a semi-retired business lawyer who specialized in corporate zoning and real estate weirdness. "You want to sue them?" he asked. "Nah," I replied. "I want to buy the battlefield." Silence. Then a chuckle. "Tell me where to start." What followed was a deep dive into county land records, development archives, and zoning history. And what we found? Well, let's just say it was the crack in the dam. The lake, as it turned out, had never been officially transferred to the HOA. 30 years ago, when the neighborhood was still a dream sketched on paper, the original developer had leased the lake for communal use. But the purchase option? Never executed. The deed remained in the hands of a dormant holding company that had long since moved operations, or died off entirely. The HOA didn't own the lake. They just thought they did. "Nobody owns it," Barry said. "Not yet." I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about curiosity blooming into strategy. About watching people with power finally realize they'd been acting on air. In the days that followed, I didn't respond to any HOA letters. I didn't engage in neighborhood debates. I simply watched. I waved when Karen drove by in her golf cart, smug as ever. I smiled at Rick when he glared at me during his morning dog walks. All the while, Barry and I were drafting a formal offer to acquire the lake, quietly, cleanly, legally. I started researching sign companies too. Not because I needed them yet, but because I was already imagining what they'd say. Private property. No trespassing. Residents not welcome. A little aggressive? Maybe. But sometimes clarity requires boldness. Especially when the people you're dealing with confuse bureaucracy for truth. What they didn't know was that the more they escalated, the closer I got to closing the deal. Every notice, every complaint, every scowl, they were adding weight to my resolve. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about ownership. It was about watching a petty system collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. The lake had always been a place of peace for me, a stillness in a noisy world. But now it was a proving ground, and I was done playing by their imaginary rules. They wanted a war over a dock and a rod. I was about to show them what happens when the guy with the fishing pole also has the deed. The day Barry called me with confirmation, I was sharpening a rusted fish hook out of pure spite. Not that I needed to, but there was something meditative about it. The rhythm, the scraping, like preparing for a hunt I already knew I would win. "Dean," Barry said, voice unusually alert for a man who usually sounded like he just woke from a nap. "It's real. The lake is unclaimed. The HOA never filed ownership. The original deed traces back to a holding company that dissolved quietly years ago. It's like a ghost property." I didn't say anything at first. I just let the words sink into the marrow. Ghost property. That meant no liens, no encumbrances, no red tape, just opportunity, if you moved fast and quiet. Barry continued, "We need to find the legal successor to the holding company. If we can locate the heirs or any surviving signatory, we can make an offer. But we can't tip the HOA off. If they catch wind, they might try to block it politically, even if they can't legally." "Let's do it," I said simply. There wasn't going to be a vote. This wasn't a debate. The moment Karen tried to regulate my mornings with her absurd fishing tag, she opened a door she didn't even know existed. Now I was walking through it. Fast forward 3 days. Barry tracked down the holding company's records through an archived incorporation document in Florida. The last known agents? An elderly couple living in Naples who had inherited it from a cousin and assumed it was worthless. Wetland runoff, they thought. Some forgotten piece of scrubland attached to an outdated development plan. They were shocked anyone even found it, Barry told me. Said if we send an offer that covers closing costs and a little extra for their time, they're happy to sign. "Send it," I said. "With a gift basket." We added a handwritten card and a bottle of Tennessee bourbon. It felt right, and with that, the gears turned faster. I was about to become the legal owner of the lake Karen thought she ruled. But I didn't celebrate yet. Not out loud. No bravado. No retaliation. Just calculation. Meanwhile, the HOA continued its theater. Karen held a community waterways meeting where she rattled off new policies. Kayak registration, early morning access hours, even a noise policy for lakefront activity. She called it environmental stewardship. I called it what it was, a nervous tightening of the reins before the horse bolts. At that point, I'd already hired a land surveyor, Ben, a retired Army engineer with zero patience for political fluff. He scoped the entire lake and its buffer zone, confirming boundaries down to the inch. "They've got 2 benches, 1 kayak rack, and 4 signs installed on what's about to become your land," he said, squinting into a laser level. "Technically, they're already trespassing." I didn't grin. I exhaled, long and slow. This wasn't about revenge. This was about correction. I wanted peace. But sometimes peace required declaration. So I started preparing my own. I designed custom wooden signs, bold, weather-sealed, almost rustic in their aesthetic but sharp in message. 12 of them, each hand-carved with the same statement: private property. No trespassing. Residents not welcome. Violators will be prosecuted. Subtle? No. But I'd learned subtlety was wasted on people like Karen. She didn't respect hints. She respected rules printed in large font. I paid a local crew from the next town to install the signs at dawn. Outsiders, people HOA wouldn't recognize. They arrived in 2 pickup trucks, boots crunching on gravel, carrying augers and power drills like they were about to raise a flag in hostile territory. I stood on my dock with a thermos of hot coffee, watching each post sink into the earth. One by one, like stakes marking a new country. By 8 a.m., the neighborhood group chat exploded. "Does anyone know what's happening at the lake? Who put these up? Is this a joke?" They tagged Karen. Tagged the board. One message read simply, "Why does it say residents not welcome? Isn't this our lake?" That was the exact question I'd hoped they'd ask. Not to me, but to her. Because Karen didn't have an answer. She only had assumptions. That afternoon, she showed up in person. Golf cart screeching to a stop near the boat launch. She was already red-faced before she even saw me. I walked over slowly, holding a leather folder under one arm. She pointed at one of the signs like it had personally insulted her. "What is this? Who gave you permission to do this?" I didn't speak. I opened the folder, revealing the signed deed. Stamped. Notarized. Filed. Final. I didn't have to explain. Just showed her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her finger dropped. Her shoulders tensed. This isn't legal," she muttered. "We've used this lake for years." "Usage is not ownership," I replied calmly. "You've assumed for years. There's a difference." "We'll fight this," she snapped. "We'll take it to the city. This is community theft. I gave a small nod. Feel free. But unless the city wants to seize private land with no legal standing under eminent domain, you're wasting your time. This isn't a sidewalk expansion. This is a lake. You can't just ban people, she said, voice cracking. Watch me, I said quietly. It's not about banning. It's about setting boundaries. Something your board seems to have trouble understanding. She stormed off without another word. But the best part? She didn't rip the signs down. She didn't even touch them. Because deep down she knew. She knew she'd lost the thing she never actually possessed. And that's when the shift began. Neighbors stopped waving. Some nodded silently. Some crossed the street to avoid me. But a few, just a few, smiled like they understood. Like they'd been quietly waiting for someone to stand up. It didn't matter. I wasn't trying to be liked. I was trying to restore order. The next HOA newsletter came out a week later. They still didn't acknowledge the change in ownership. Still acted like nothing had happened. But I knew better. The silence was their white flag. They were regrouping, recalculating, spinning narratives. But narratives don't change deeds. And my name was now inked across every inch of the water they once tried to control with laminated clipboards and empty threats. I didn't return to fishing right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted the act to mean something. I waited. Let the dust settle. Let them feel the absence. Let them miss what they tried to take from me. Because when I returned to that dock with my rod in hand, I wanted every cast to land not just in water, but in memory. Memory of the moment they lost control, not to a protest, not to an argument, but to a purchase. Clean. Legal. Irrefutable. Sometimes justice doesn't come with shouting or flames. Sometimes it comes with ink. And patience. And timing. The lake was quiet again. But now it was mine. And the silence? That was victory. The first sign that things were about to spiral wasn't the angry HOA emails or the group chat flame wars. It was a cupcake. Specifically, a red velvet cupcake left anonymously on my porch with blue frosting and a plastic flag toothpick poked through the top. There was no note, just the flag, which read, "For freedom." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a symbol of what this absurd neighborhood power play had turned into. A war fought with baked goods and boundary markers. But beneath the frosting and faux patriotism, tension was boiling. It started slow. A couple neighbors I used to chat with during morning walks now avoided eye contact. The HOA newsletter, still refusing to acknowledge my ownership outright, had started using vague language like lake access under reevaluation and temporary disruption in waterfront privileges. Temporary? Not exactly. But they clung to hope the way a sinking ship clings to denial. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. She had gone quiet for a few days after our lakeside confrontation, but when she came back, it was with a vengeance. One morning, I heard she called an emergency board meeting, not at the community center, but at her house, more private, more controllable. That same night, new flyers appeared taped to mailboxes and tucked under windshield wipers. They were headlined, "Reclaim Our Lake, Stand Against Privatization." Beneath it was a dramatic photo of the dock, my dock, taken at an unflattering angle, making it look like a fortress of exclusion. The irony, of course, was that nobody ever cared about the lake until they were told they couldn't have it. Before that, it was just background noise. Now it was sacred. Typical. What came next wasn't an argument. It was an escalation. I noticed it one morning while untying my canoe. The ropes were frayed, not by time, but by something sharp. Clean cuts. Deliberate. A message. That same night, I came home to find my welcome mat reeking of something foul, rotten eggs or maybe dead fish. Someone had doused it in a stink bomb. Still, I didn't react. That's what they wanted. Outrage. Retaliation. Something they could point to and say, "See? He's the problem." Instead, I installed security cameras. Top-of-the-line motion sensors, night vision, cloud backups. I made sure they were subtle, barely visible but positioned perfectly to catch movement around the dock, the boat shed, and the property line. Then, as if on cue, they slipped. It was Rick. Hoodie over his head, flashlight in hand, bolt cutters swinging low like a pendulum. He crept toward the boat shed under cover of darkness, crouching, cautious. I watched it live from my phone, thumb hovering over the alarm button. I waited until he reached for the dock line, then hit the siren. The speakers screeched like banshees. He bolted, tripped over a rock, scrambled up, and vanished into the trees like a kid caught with a stolen candy bar. I didn't even chase him. I didn't need to. I had timestamps. Footage. Proof. The next morning, I emailed it directly to the sheriff's office and CC'd the HOA board for good measure. By noon, Rick had received a misdemeanor citation for attempted trespass and property tampering. Karen tried to spin it. She claimed Rick was checking storm damage and had been misidentified. No one bought it. The footage went viral in the neighborhood group chat. I printed screenshots and dropped them into every mailbox. On the back I wrote, "Private property means private rules. Respect the line, or pay the fine. That line stuck. It became a meme. Someone even photoshopped Karen's face onto a cartoon queen trying to storm a castle labeled Dean's Dock. Meanwhile, whispers began to float through the streets like pollen in spring. People were questioning her leadership. Not loudly, yet, but it was there. The confidence crack. You could hear it in how people started sentences with, "I'm not saying she's wrong, but..." Then came the march. Saturday morning. Karen and a cluster of her loyalists, mostly retirees, dog walkers, and her weekly book club, dressed in white and khaki, carrying signs that read things like, "Water is for everyone," and "No tyrants on the shore." They marched down the street like it was 1963, and they were heading for the Lincoln Memorial. But when they reached the lake, 2 uniformed deputies were already there, standing by the new perimeter marker, holding a printed copy of my trespass policy. One woman tried to step forward and was politely asked to return to the sidewalk. Karen shouted about civil liberties and neighborhood heritage, but it was all theater now. A performance with no audience. I wasn't even there. I was in town, sipping coffee and buying supplies for the next phase. Because while she was rallying her base, I was preparing something far more permanent. Lake Liberty wasn't going to be just a power move. It was going to be a structure, a legacy. I'd already filed paperwork for a private recreational business, a members-only lake club. I picked the name deliberately. Lake Liberty sounded like freedom, sounded like choice. It also sounded like the exact opposite of what the HOA had been peddling for years. I hired a contractor named Vince, big guy, ex-Navy, no patience for nonsense, to build a small dockside lodge. Just 2 rooms, one for storage, one as a check-in office. We added a gate to the main trail, updated the signage to reflect the new private entity, and installed a keypad for members. The new signs were beautiful, hand-painted, wood-stained, etched with gold lettering. They read, "Lake Liberty Private Club. Membership required. HOA residents excluded." That last line, that was the spark, the catalyst. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy with a deed. I was a symbol, an outpost for everyone who'd ever been fined for a lawn height violation or chastised over a mismatched mailbox. Membership applications flooded in. Families from nearby towns, old fishing buddies, paddleboarders, even a couple influencers. I set fair prices, offered discounts to veterans and teachers, and created a waiting list before the month was over. The HOA was losing control, not just over the lake, but over the narrative. Karen tried everything. Letters to the city. Threats of zoning violations. An attempt to pass a board resolution declaring the lake as community heritage space. Barry shut it down with a single cease and desist letter, attached with copies of the deed, and a polite warning about potential defamation suits. After that, Karen began unraveling in real time. At one board meeting, she slammed her gavel so hard it snapped in half. At another, she stormed out mid-sentence when someone asked if they'd ever had legal ownership of the lake to begin with. The climax came quietly. Mr. Phelps, an older gentleman who rarely spoke, always wore a faded fishing hat, stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "Karen, maybe it's time someone else ran this place. You told us things that weren't true. Now we're locked out of our own weekends. That's not leadership." Silence. Then slow nods. Karen blinked. Her gavel hovered, then lowered. Later that evening, Marcia from the board came by my house. She handed me a cupcake with blue frosting and a sheepish grin. "Don't ask why," she said. "Just congrats. Karen's resigning next week." I took the cupcake and stared at the lake, now glowing under the moonlight like polished glass. I hadn't won a battle. I had redrawn the entire map. And the war? It wasn't over yet. Because I wasn't finished, not until Lake Liberty was untouchable. Not just by HOA policy, but by history. The resignation came with less noise than expected. No dramatic farewell speech, no final newsletter laced with passive aggression. Just a line buried deep in the meeting minutes. Karen M. has stepped down effective immediately. It felt anticlimactic. After months of shouting and scheming, she evaporated into the background like a bad signal finally dropped. But that silence, that absence, it was the beginning of something new. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. The kind of quiet that follows the final crack of a storm, when the air is clean and the debris hasn't been counted. I stood on the porch the next morning, coffee in hand, watching 2 squirrels chase each other across the fence by the lake. The sun glinted off the water, now clearer than I remembered it. Maybe that was just me seeing it differently. It was time. Not to gloat, not to parade, but to build. Something real. Something that would outlast me, outlast this feud, and outlive the pettiness of one woman's clipboard dictatorship. That afternoon, Vince and his crew returned with timber and cement mixers. The small lodge we'd planned was finally going up. We kept it simple, 2 rooms, wide windows, pitched roof with a wraparound porch. It wasn't meant to be flashy. It was meant to be honest. A place where you could check in, rent a rod, buy bait, or sit quietly in a rocking chair and watch the breeze flirt with the surface of the lake. We added an American flag to the corner post, not as a statement, but as a punctuation mark. Beside it, we installed a second wooden sign, Lake Liberty Private Club. Membership required. HOA residents excluded. That last line was deliberate. Some thought it was harsh. Others called it poetic justice. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about architecture, of rules, of values, of what it meant to belong. The signs were updated across the lake trail. We added a metal gate to the main path with an access keypad and a weatherproof camera, the kind that sent real-time footage to my phone. Membership cards were mailed out to new members. Local families from outside the HOA boundaries, veterans, teachers, small-town folks who just wanted a peaceful place to cast a line or let their kids wade into the shallows without being harassed about flotation device compliance. The lodge opened on a Thursday. I wore a clean flannel and unlocked the door at exactly 9 a.m. No ribbon cutting, no mayor. Just Mia, the college student I'd hired to manage rentals, and Hal, a retired Coast Guard chief who now handled maintenance and guest relations. Within the first week, we had 72 active members and a waiting list growing longer every day. What shocked me wasn't how fast people signed up, it was who they were. Some drove in from 2 towns over just to escape their own HOA nightmares. One woman told me she'd been fined for planting non-native tulips in her front yard. Another guy had gotten 3 citations in 1 week. One for an American flag being too faded, another for excessive garage door visibility, and the last for letting his dog's leash extend beyond HOA-sanctioned length during walks. These people weren't rebels. They were just tired, and Lake Liberty wasn't a protest for them. It was sanctuary. Naturally, word spread fast. A local journalist caught wind of the story and asked for an interview. I agreed cautiously. The article ran under the headline, "Man buys lake after HOA fine, builds members-only sanctuary." Within 2 days, the online version had been shared over 10,000 times. My inbox exploded. I had to disable the contact form on the website because people kept writing their HOA horror stories and asking if I could help them buy back freedom. It was flattering. It was also a little terrifying. I didn't want to be a folk hero. I just wanted to fish in peace. But when people pushed you far enough, and you push back successfully, they start seeing you as proof that maybe they don't have to take it anymore. And that's when Karen reemerged. Not in person, not yet. But digitally. An anonymous Facebook group called Lake Access for All popped up, followed by a suspiciously Karen-esque post. Lake Liberty promotes discrimination by banning neighborhood residents from using their own natural resource. The irony burned. The same people who tried to find me, harass me, vandalize my boat, and lie about legal ownership were now claiming to be the victims of exclusion. But I didn't respond. Not directly. I didn't need to. Because while she was busy launching a digital resistance, I was organizing our first Lake Liberty event, Freedom Fest, scheduled for July 4th. We put up flyers, opened the lodge for ticket sales, and partnered with a local veterans charity. Hal handled logistics, Mia coordinated music and food trucks, and Vince built a temporary stage on the dock. We set up kayak races, fishing competitions, and a silent auction. I expected maybe 100 people. Over 300 showed. Families arrived with lawn chairs and coolers. Kids ran along the shore, laughter echoing like it belonged there. No one asked about permits. No one checked IDs. No one filed complaints about the decibel level of acoustic guitars. That night, the sky lit up with fireworks over the lake. I stood beside the fire pit we'd built from old stone, holding a drink, watching colors explode and reflect across the water. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Leonard, the new HOA president. "This place turned out better than I expected," he said, offering a handshake. I took it. "We got caught up in the wrong fight," he added. "Most folks just want to move on." I nodded. "Then let's move on." "Still," he said carefully, "maybe next summer we could organize a neighborhood day. Just once a year. Not an invasion. Just something symbolic. A bridge." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the lake, at the floating kayaks, the teenagers roasting marshmallows. "Maybe," I said. "Let's see how this season goes." The next morning, Karen finally appeared at the gate. Sun hat. Giant sunglasses. Her voice had that familiar tight edge as she demanded entry, claiming I was violating moral standards and banning people based on geography. I held up the laminated club policy. "Just like your HOA pool," I said. "You made the rules once. Now I'm playing the same game." She called it tyranny. I called it symmetry. She knocked over a brochure rack on her way out. Hal picked it up without a word. 2 days later, a kid rode by the lodge on his bike, skidded to a stop, and shouted, "Hey, Mr. Dean, my dad says you own the whole lake. Is that true?" I smiled. "Every inch of it." He gave me a thumbs up and pedaled off. I watched him disappear down the road and felt something shift. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a blueprint. Lake Liberty wasn't just a place. It was a reminder that when the system pushes you too far, you can push back. You can redraw the map. You can reclaim peace, not through rage, but through ownership, structure, and a stubborn sense of what's fair. And Karen? She could scream all she wanted, but she'd scream from behind a locked gate, staring at a lake that no longer listened. The final sign went up on a morning, so still it felt like the lake itself was holding its breath. No birdsong, no breeze, just me, a cordless drill, and a wooden plaque I'd been designing for weeks. Dark oak, sealed in resin, trimmed in brass, carved with words that didn't shout, but rang like truth. Private Lake Club. Members only. HOA officials permanently banned. Enjoy the view from afar. Below the lettering, a carved base leapt over the words like a final, triumphant punctuation mark. I stepped back and stared at it, the lake glassy behind it, the sun just beginning to shimmer across the water. That was it. The last move. Not out of vengeance, but out of closure. This was the ending I wrote, not in retaliation, but in principle. Lake Liberty now stood complete. And with it, the saga that started with a $600 fishing fine and a clipboard dictatorship finally folded into something larger. But of course, nothing in a place like this ends clean. Not when people like Karen still roam the edges. Even after her resignation, she hadn't disappeared. She just mutated, shifting into rumor and resentment. I heard she tried to start a rival nature club at a mosquito-ridden retention pond behind the post office. That lasted about a week, until she got into a shouting match with a city worker over fogging schedules and storm drain access. Her credibility was gone. Her influence had evaporated. And still, she clung to the illusion of relevance like a shadow that didn't know the sun had already risen. Meanwhile, Lake Liberty had become a full ecosystem. Families booked weekend time slots. Teachers brought small groups for outdoor education. A few veterans organized Sunday fishing meetups. I hired more staff, college students, retirees, even a local artist who painted signs and helped maintain the lodge garden. It wasn't just a business. It was a place with rhythm. A sanctuary where peace wasn't an accident, it was engineered. HOA politics faded into background noise. Leonard, the new board president, focused on things that actually mattered: potholes, trash collection, replanting the community garden. Once, he stopped by just to walk the trail along the lake. We nodded to each other like men who had survived something neither of us cared to name out loud. Then came the town's annual community showcase, a sort of local festival where small businesses, parks, and groups set up booths and promote their work. It wasn't something I'd ever planned on attending, but Mia and Hal insisted. We set up a modest display, a folding table with photos of the lake, a few brochures, some of Mia's homemade beef jerky, and a raffle bowl for a free weekend pass. A banner hung behind us in bold green letters: 2 fish, no kings. It was a joke Mia came up with. It stuck. The day rolled on like most small-town fairs, slow but pleasant. People drifted by, asked questions, told stories about lakes they'd grown up near. One man said he hadn't been fishing since his dad died and signed up for a day pass on the spot. Another asked if we allowed dogs. We did, as long as the dog didn't try to eat the bait. Then like a specter, she arrived. I spotted her across the lot before she saw me. Wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, posture stiff like she was holding in a speech she hadn't been invited to give. Karen walked slowly, looping through booths, stopping to talk to no one, clearly hoping someone would talk to her. No one did. She looked like a ghost moving through a party that no longer remembered why it feared her. Eventually, she arrived at our table. She picked up a brochure, flipped it open with mock interest, then glanced up. "I heard your club's doing well," she said, tone coldly polite. "Better than expected," I replied. "We've had to expand the waitlist twice." She gave a tight laugh, the kind you use when pretending not to choke on your own bitterness. "Must be exhausting. Managing people, enforcing rules, maintaining everything." I leaned forward, not aggressively, just enough to let my voice drop slightly. "You'd be surprised how smooth things run when the rules make sense, and when people actually want to follow them." Her jaw flexed. A pause. Then quieter. "I never meant for it to go this far." "You tried to find me for fishing on my own dock," I said, still calm. "You taped warnings to my door. Encouraged vandalism. Harassed me publicly. You led a community to believe I was the villain because I asked a question about ownership." She didn't answer. Her eyes scanned the table, but they weren't reading anything. She was trying to find a way to stay standing. "That lake was part of our identity," she whispered. "No," I said. "It was part of your control." Another pause. Then she reached for one of the raffle cards, scribbled something on the back, and walked away without another word. Later that evening, after we packed up, I flipped over the card. 2 words: "You win." I didn't keep it. I didn't need to. I already had the lake. The following weekend, a small girl, maybe 7 or 8, approached the lodge while I was trimming a rose bush out front. She tugged on her dad's hand and asked, "Does that man really own the whole lake?" I smiled before the dad could answer. "Yep," I said. Every inch of it. She beamed like I'd just told her I was the king of candy. Then she ran off to join her siblings on the dock. That moment hit me harder than any board meeting ever could, because I realized what I'd built wasn't just a rebuttal to injustice. It was something generational. A place where the next wave of kids would grow up thinking a lake was a place for peace, not politics. A few weeks later, I was sitting by the fire pit near the dock. The sun had just dipped below the treeline. The sky was a canvas of fading gold. A breeze rolled across the water, gentle and sure. Hal sat beside me, sipping tea. He didn't say much. He never did. But after a long silence, he looked over and said, "You know, Dean, some places are worth fighting for." I nodded. "Some fights are worth outlasting." He chuckled. "And some people just need to be reminded that power ain't the same as ownership." I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the lake, the same lake I used to approach like a visitor. Now it felt like home in the deepest sense. Not because I held a deed, but because I had rewritten the story, quietly, deliberately, and permanently. As night settled in, the fire crackled beside me. Somewhere across the lake, a frog croaked. Crickets tuned their nightly symphony. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it all wash over me. No gavel, no fines, no HOA politics, just water, wind, and the steady, unshakable stillness of a lake that was finally, irrevocably mine.